You are listening to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour, the place to be to learn about the latest and greatest life stories from people who are doing amazing disability advocacy work. Hi everyone, today we get to welcome Miles O'Brien onto the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour. Miles is a broadcast news journalist specializing in science, technology, and aerospace. He is the science correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, a producer and director for the PBS science documentary series Nova, and a correspondent for the PBS documentary series Frontline. For nearly 17 years in the news business, he worked for CNN as the science, environment, and aerospace space correspondent and the anchor of various programs such as American Morning. In February 2014, he had an accident where he had to have his left forearm amputated. Miles was stacking cases onto a cart after a reporting trip to Japan and the Philippines when a case filled with TV equipment fell on his arm, causing compartment syndrome and eventually resulting in the loss of his left arm above the elbow. Welcome, Miles.
It's great to be here, Ming. Is there somebody else too?
Yes, so I was telling you yesterday that Gene was going to join us because
Gene, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gene, because of his interest in science and aviation. So we recorded your intro already. Impressive background. And thank you so much for giving us the honor of coming on the show. And as I told you earlier, Gene Mishner will also be joining us and asking you some questions a little later on regarding space and aviation. If you're ready, we're going to start with our first question.
Sure.
Okay. So the first question I have for you is, I know that you enjoy flying and you're a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So how has the mechanics of flying your own plane changed since your injury? How have you adapted so that you could continue your other hobbies as well? As I know you have many: running, riding a bike, diving, all these things that you love because you lead a very active lifestyle. So how have you adapted to post-injury life?
The one thing I always say is I just, one adaptation at a time, one challenge at a time is the way I've focused on things. And each of them has their own set of challenges, sometimes big, sometimes small. Figuring out how to zip up a zipper, how to tie a tie, how to do, tie your shoelaces. All these things have their own little challenges. Aviation for me was kind of the last on the long road of getting back to normal items, because it was kind of one of the most important things in my life prior to my injury. And obviously a bit of a challenge with one arm, or so I thought. What I learned pretty quickly was the plane I used to own, which was a Cirrus SR-22. I used to sit, and you'd have the stick here where my left arm was, and then the throttle here. So it was a very bimanual airplane. So I got in a plane. I had sold the plane anyway, but I got in a plane like it and tried both left and right seat. And it was very bimanual either way, whichever way I sat. Even if I sat on the right side and used the stick to control it, I still had to control the throttle with the prosthetic arm, which is difficult to do the fine tuning you'd like to do. So I went back to airplanes with a wheel and a throttle. And so I put my prosthetic on the wheel and it fits in there nicely. And the distance between the wheel and the throttle is very short. So if I set up the airplane properly and I have the prosthetic locked in, I can go back and forth between the two. And it's really the most critical moment is pretty much on landing, when you're trying to, get the power settings just right and so forth. And so I figured it out. It turned out to be not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. But it's like a lot of those challenges, you just have to, I think what's important is when you are presented with these challenges, stop thinking about the way you used to do things and focus about what's there at the moment, what tools you have, and how you can make it work in a different way. You just have to kind of change your thinking as much as anything.
Mm-hmm. So I know you have various gadgets in your house. that help you with your daily activities. You've been very open about that. For instance, you wrote, I use a cutting board that sits on a suction cup and has a lip and some spikes that can hold a slice of bread or a piece of fruit in place. I have a one-armed bottle opener. Some of these things I won't know how to pronounce, so you could correct me.
That's right.
A mezzaluna, a knife shaped like a half moon. A fork with a knife-like edge called a nork. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A hook that allows me to button and unbutton my one cuff. Some very sticky material called Dyson
Mm-hmm.
that can hold a jar steady on a counter, and of course an electric can opener.
Well, so first of all, this is the key to cutting things that require a knife for a one-armed person, because you just take it and you rock it, and it's called a mezzaluna. That's Italian for crescent moon, and but or whatever you want to call it, a rocker knife is another way they describe it. So I carry this wherever I go, and
it's compact.
It's really I take it in a restaurant, and hopefully they don't take it away, and I've had that happen where they take it away and I never see it again. But the good news is when they see this in the dishwashing department, they know that's not theirs. And so that works pretty well. So I do try to keep that with me. If I don't have it with me, I can always use my prosthetic hook if I'm wearing it, but I don't always wear that. By the time I get to dinner, I might have been wearing this all day on a shoot, and it gets, a little tiresome wearing it after a while. So I'll take it off to give my stump a little breather in the evening. So I'll record, I need this kind of thing. Or, what I'll do, frankly, is I will ask somebody with me to help me if need be, or I just order something that is fork ready. So, and then this is the Dyson. This is the coolest stuff ever. It's extremely sticky. So, the key if you think about how you use two arms, you're mostly using your non-dominant arm to hold things in place. And then you're doing all the work. 90% of the work is with your dominant hand. Fortunately, this was my dominant hand before my injury. So what this does, if I put a bowl on this or a jar that needs to be opened, it sticks to the counter like nobody's business, and it sticks to the object in the same way. And so it gives you a firm footing for the bowl or whatever you want, or the jar that you want to open. So those are a couple little things, little button holders. I'll give you a little secret. This is Tommy Hilfiger. Has a great adaptive clothing line. I don't know if you've checked this out, but all of these are magnets.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I don't have to spend a lot of time buttoning. If I wear shirts like these, I can still button with one hand, but it gets tedious. And after a while, all this extra work that you're putting on your one hand kind of adds up, and I get a lot of fatigue in my hand. And so I try to wear the prosthetic. For a lot of times I'll go for stretches of not wearing it much, and my hand will start to get very tired. So even this hook, which can only take, let's say it takes 10 or 15% of the workload off of this, that makes a difference. So it's important to use the prosthetic, especially when you're doing a lot of manual labor, just like when I'm setting up cameras and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So going back, what about when you're in a public setting or on vacation or on a work assignment where you don't have everything that you have at home?
Yeah, you go back. You have to have like about 3 ways to do everything. So, I have a way to do it when I have the prosthetic on, and so, like for example, if I need to uncoil, one of the hardest things to do for a one-armed person is deal with headphone cables. You know how they get all intertwined. And so if I have my hook, I can put the cable in and try to sort it all out. It's very hard to do with one hand. But what I do is if I don't have my hook on and I'm on a plane, I need to sort with the cable, I use my foot. I put it between my toe, big toe and my little toe, and I do it that way. People kind of look at me funny, but who cares, right?
Yeah,
got to get the job done. So you got to have kind of 3 ways of doing everything and be ready to adapt to that moment, because you're right. You're not going to have every gadget with you all the time. You may not be wearing the arm. You might be out there just you and your, arm and stump, and how are you going to figure it out?
And does TSA even let you have all those gadgets?
Well, yeah, that little sickle knife. I tend to pack that and check it. I don't. carry. I carry a backpack on board, but I don't carry an extra piece of luggage because that's hard for me to manage. So I always check a bag. So I'll put stuff in there for sure. And most of the stuff is, actually I've actually mistakenly kept it in my backpack, and they've let it through. So I don't know. It's kind of on the edge, I suppose.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear and see that you're so open about sharing, your injury and the adaptive equipment that you use, because the more that people see, like when Tommy Hilfiger sees that Miles O'Brien is wearing their shirt, they're gonna, step it up.
I was kind of hoping they'd send me a bunch of free stuff, product placement, right? No, it's and I think that the Tommy Hilfiger brand and that line of clothing, that's an important moment. I think that's a big company recognizing that there is an important market that is unserved completely out there. That is people who are not, the classic model for whatever reason. Either they're using a wheelchair, or they have prosthetics, or they've had a stroke. Any number of things that make it difficult to use clothing in the conventional way that we make clothing. And for them to recognize that and create a product line around that, my hat is off to them. I think that says a lot about where society is on disability and understanding what disability is. And really, that word disability, which is, a lot of people who are disabled don't like that word. Differently abled might be a better word. But the point is, I think all of us who have challenges we just need to live our lives like we want to and achieve our goals just like we want to. And we don't want people to pity us, but we want people to recognize that we're real individuals with different sorts of needs. And there's a market there. There's respect that comes from the fact that we are people who look different, but there's nothing standing between us and our goals. That's the important point, I think.
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely been progress. It's undeniable. Although I would like to say I would like to see those shirts in mainstream stores and common stores like Target and other places.
Yeah, they're never in the stores. You have to get them online, unfortunately. And I guess I guess that's because maybe they're saying there's not enough people just walking into the stores these days. These days, of course, it's a whole different thing. But I agree with you. I think it should be right out there, and there should be. Why aren't there mannequins in wheelchairs? Why aren't there one-arm mannequins? That kind of thing. That should be. But you see runway models missing limbs now. You see runway models in wheelchairs. I think the fashion world is slowly but surely recognizing that there are different ways to get around, and there are different shapes, and that all of those should be celebrated in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Or if anybody's going to make a one-arm model mannequin become available, I think that would be you, Miles. So moving on, what is missing that still needs to be invented that would make your life easier in terms of living life as an amputee? I'm sure there are other things that could be invented as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you can see this. My amputation is like right about here, so I don't have an elbow, and so this is a very this device. The hook goes back to 1912, and the pulley system that controls the arm, this manual arm, goes back almost to the Civil War. So but it's also very functional, light, and hardy, which is good. So there's been a lot of focus on trying to come up with a bionic robotic solution to losing a hand and an arm. And it's a huge challenge. Think about all the things your hand does and can do, and the versatility and the sensory perception, the dexterity, the fine touch. All that is very difficult, first of all, to even put into a robotic hand with actuators and machines and all that, and a haptic response. But then on top of that, how do you control it? How do I get what I'm thinking into that hand? That's the choke point right now. So there are a lot of exciting projects which are getting close to this, but it would be great to have an arm that had sensory feedback, where I could feel things as I touch them. This idea of proprioception. So if I close my eyes and move my hand, I know where my hand is, right? I don't know where this one is. So proprioception is a really cool thing because when you're reaching in a dark space to get something, you know where your hand is. And then ultimately the mission that I want solved, which hasn't been solved, is typing at a QWERTY keyboard with two hands. And this thing will not get you there, right? It just doesn't, I can bang away at, peck away at one key here and there, but it's not very, it doesn't have the fidelity or the dexterity to do that. So, so I do a lot of dictation and I type with one hand and, I kind of muddle through that, but I spend a lot of time on keyboards. So that's the thing I've asked if there's anything close to that coming, and it's way down the road because in order to have that kind of feedback and dexterity, we got to solve the problem of tapping into the remaining nerves, sending signals down cables, having them operate something with multiple degrees of freedom. It's an incredibly complicated thing. And so it's, here I am, I cover science and technology. And people always say, why don't you have like a robot arm, And unfortunately, this bionic arm idea has been kind of, there's a lot of myths associated with it. I think people see Star Wars and expect the Luke arm is around the corner. And some of these arms look like they might be like that, but they really don't deliver on the promise. So really when you consider weight, cost, durability, functionality, I can take this anywhere. I've actually gone to a Home Depot to fix it, real simple things. It's basically a bicycle cable, very straightforward. When you consider what it does for what it is, it's like the best technological solution. I can get an arm that's, robotic. I can have a pole driven into my remaining bone called osseointegration to attach the arm. I can do all those things, but it really doesn't do much more than this one does yet. It's cool looking and everybody thinks, oh, wow, you got a robot arm, but it's really not. If you look at it, it doesn't do the things you think you would want your hand to do. So in the end, replacing this is pretty darn difficult. When you look at lower limb amputations, where the foot and the knee, those things are much more straightforward and kind of targeted missions. Not as it doesn't have to be quite as flexible as the hand in every way, shape, and form. Lower limb prosthetics are, in some cases, can actually improve human performance, and they've come to that point. And we are a long way from that with upper limb prosthetics. It's just a huge engineering challenge, which a lot of people are trying to solve, but it's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I saw that you interviewed Amy Mullins for that a number of years ago, right?
I did, and that was when I had two arms. And I looked back at that story not long after my injury, and I realized that at the time I kind of bought into a lot of the hype. And I think a lot of people who don't have physical challenges don't ask, as reporters, don't ask enough questions. They see the cool arm and they think, wow, that's really neat. And I'm going to do a gee whiz story about how robot arms are near. But if you really need to ask a few more questions. And it's the kind of questions that I started asking when I was much more of a customer than just a journalist. And it's funny how my view of the whole thing changed. And I felt a little bit like I perpetuated some of the hype that's out there.
Yeah. Well, when you don't have the live experience, it really is different. And now,
absolutely, yeah,
a lot of people don't get to have to jump to that different vantage point and have that experience. So to see what you perceived before and how you view things now, so you get to learn a lot. So that's a perfect segue onto the next question, which is that you conveyed that when you're not in that world, you don't see it. This is quoting you. You have to be there to fully understand. When referring to the stories, of course, you did on bionics prior to getting injured and after getting injured. So what else has being a part of a community you had little association with, if any at all? There's some of referring to the disability community, of course. How has it informed you in terms of other aspects of living or approaching life and the pervasive attitudes towards these communities that you've learned along the way?
Yeah,
Has
it's
yeah.
really, Ming, I, having had, I lived 55 years with two arms, and I feel like it's a whole different world being this person. And I feel, first of all, I feel much more comfortable uh, just talking to people who have challenges because I've got, there's a certain common understanding, no matter what the disability might be, I think that we all share. And one of the things, I don't know if it, what your thoughts are on this, but I much prefer people who, because everybody's curious, right? When everybody meets you, they want to know how this happened or why you're in a chair or whatever the case may be. But a lot of times they'll dance around that subject. And it actually, to me, that's more awkward than just asking. I mean, I don't know if it's the first question you should ask somebody who's in this situation, but it's okay to ask. And I try to encourage people to understand that I don't mind talking about it and explaining it. Yeah, it gets old explaining how it happened over and over again. Sometimes I tell them just look it up on Google, but that's okay. People are curious. They understand that when people, it's just different, and human beings are curious that way. So I think what has changed is first of all, I hear from disabled people a lot. Certainly I hear from arm amputees quite a bit, but other challenges as well. Because I think, I've walked them out on their shoes, and I think they know that I have a certain level of empathy that I didn't have before. And it's an interesting bond. It's really, um, it's kind of a different level of communication than I frankly had with uh, physically challenged people. I always felt I was not in any way encumbered, or I never looked down upon people who had challenges like that by any stretch. But I think I probably was a little more in that awkward category, which I felt on the receiving end, and maybe a little reluctant to just have a candid discussion with people. I think we all just want to, be treated human to human, and this is in the context of meeting somebody. This is a point of curiosity. It's a point where you get to know each other, and in a way, it puts a wall between the relationship if it's just never discussed, I think.
As an able-bodied person, you had a lot of privileges. The vast majority of people in other minority groups did not have, such as the disability community. We're talking about white privilege, of course. But now, as a person who has a disability, um, I'm sure some people view you and perceive you differently, right? So,
Yeah.
so I'm sure you know by now that people with disabilities are some of the most marginalized groups in the world, especially in developing countries. Some would say treated as second-class citizens, if not worse. How has the fall in hierarchy in terms of group social status, prestige, and change in perception affected you personally or professionally?
It's a subtle thing to really get you wrap your head around, but it is there are subtle little cues that people are always telling you that somehow you're not at the top of the food chain here, or whatever you want to say. You're right. As a white, elite, privileged American, able-bodied, I'm on top of the world, right? Or was on top of the world, but now you know, I'm different, and I'm in a different category, and I I don't mind it a bit. I mean, I think it's really important to challenge people's perceptions of that. I make a point of never hiding my disability when I'm on television. I want people to. I want there to be stories that involve people like you and me, where we're just out there telling our stories, and it's not about our disability. It's about the story. And this happens to be told by a person who has a hook for an arm, or uses a wheelchair to get around. And I think that that helps me feel like I am, I have purpose and I'm performing my mission, and I can overlook a lot of um, the ways that people might want to try to judge me because I'm, different. People want to put you in a box, and so it's very important for us uh, in the disabled community to not allow that to happen. And it's so my personal mission is to just ignore that as much as possible, to show people my competency and my capabilities, and how it really hasn't stopped me from doing. It hasn't stopped me from being me. I am the same person. I come to it with much more advantage to the table than if I had lost my arm at age 20 and tried to set out in my career at that time with this disability. You have to wonder how far I would have gotten, right? Would that have been an impediment to me succeeding? I think, being honest, I think I would have faced all kinds of barriers back in 1982 when I began to become a one-armed television reporter. So you're right. I've got it made, right? I've had a career and had nothing to prove to anybody. And all I had to do is prove to myself that I could get back to what I was. And I think people would accept that. But I think there is a lesson in there for people who are injured earlier on or born with differences. I think there is a sense of purpose and determination that we all need to have, and a desire to meet our goals, and really just the rest of the world be damned. They will tell you what you can and cannot do. And I had a lot of people tell me these things after my injury, that I wouldn't be able to fly, for example, all those kinds of things. And I wouldn't get into an argument with them because I just watch me, just watch me. And so I think we all need to get out there and let people watch us do our thing, watch us be successful, watch a woman such as yourself travel to all corners of the world and not be at all fazed by that. That's a statement. That's a huge statement that over time, as more and more of that happens, and as you amplify that through social media, that changes, excuse me, that changes people's perception of us, but it also inspires other people to do the same. And that's, I don't think of myself as trying to inspire people on a day-to-day basis. But if me appearing on TV with this hook showing or just my stump or whatever, if that makes somebody who is 20 years old and looks the same as me think maybe I could be a TV reporter, that is awesome. That would be awesome to me if that happened. I hope it does.
So, Miles, what is acute compartment syndrome?
So you can imagine inside your body, the blood, the veins are actually wrapped in kind of a sheathing. It's not unlike electrical wire that you would use to wire your house, that sheathing around it. And there are circumstances that can occur when there's been an impact injury where the veins inside essentially swell up but are constrained by that sheathing, and it can cut off the blood flow essentially. And so I had this case fall on my arm, and it was painful. It was a bad bruise, but nothing appeared to be broken. I was traveling and alone, and didn't, was kind of denying the whole thing anyway, and thought it would get better the next day. And when I woke up the next day, it was extremely painful, and I knew tingling and pain in my numbness in my hand. So I knew there was something really wrong. I needed to get some help, but it took me a while to get that all together because I was overseas. And so unfortunately, by the time I got to a doctor who said, you need emergency surgery, things went south pretty quickly. And so it was just too late. So, it's one of these things. I asked my doctor when I got back if I would have had a different outcome in the US. And he said, maybe not, because a lot of times the compartment syndrome manifests its symptoms kind of late in the game, and you may not have gotten to help in time. And then, interestingly, I've heard from a lot of people over the years who've had it as well, and have been had surgeons perform heroic efforts to keep the limb, to preserve the limb at all costs. But in the end, the outcome is not so great. They're often left with a lot of pain and neuropathy, and not a fully functioning hand by any stretch. So it may have, even if I'd been here, I might have ended up with a different kind of disability and problem, which is to say, an arm that wasn't very functional and causing a lot of pain. So so it's a heck of a way to learn about something you didn't know about. That's for sure.
Yeah, as you were describing your wiki, you're Googling it as you're going into surgery. So
yeah, trying to figure out what he just said. Yeah, exactly.
So the next question is, quoting you again briefly, you say people do respond how you respond to it when describing your injury, but how have you responded to how others respond to you in terms of how you look physically? I'm smirking because that's kind of a roundabout. You once wrote, my other big problem had to do with my livelihood. I am in a business where looks matter, and I wasn't aware of any one-arm TV correspondents. With my empty sleeve and my on-camera career. So, and then you also added, I've always heard amputees talk about the stairs and the acute awareness of being viewed as different. So how has looking different, post-injury affected your confidence, and how others react to you, either in personal or professional settings?
Yeah, it's there's a certain amount of irony if you think about what I do for a living. My entire career has been built around the idea that I want people to stare at me, right? Because that's what TV people do, right? So for me, it was kind of interesting to be stared at in that way. However, it at first, occasionally it can be, people can't help themselves, and they have to kind of latch on, and they look at you, look at the stump, and they don't even know they're doing it, and it can be a little bit invasive, to say the least. But mostly, if I catch people doing that, if I see somebody doing that, I'll say, hey, this happens occasionally, and here I am, and you have any questions? And that usually kind of breaks them out of their spell and disarms them from, or puts them in a different place. I think what's really important when you're meeting people who, of course, immediately are, noticing it and looking at it, et cetera, is, I don't necessarily come in and tell my story of why I have one arm immediately. But what I do is I make sure that people are comfortable with me, and can understand that I am not bothered by it, and they shouldn't be. That I'm going to proceed about my day and do my thing, and they shouldn't have to worry or feel like they're walking on eggshells around me. And I think a lot of that is just in the way you meet people. There's a certain confidence that you need to have, and that's not an easy thing when you've been through a life-changing event like this, to develop that kind of confidence. I'm lucky because I'm kind of, again, like we talked about, I've got years in the public eye, years of doing what I do. I didn't feel any insecurities about my career. I was initially worried about just, what it would be like to appear on camera this way. Would that distract from my stories? Would people be looking at the arm, not listening to me on what I'm talking about? And I decided the best thing to do was just not worry about it, be confident in my abilities, which I knew I could do once I conquered a few of the basics, like figuring out how to dictate a script and that kind of thing, and I can still operate a camera pretty well, not quite like I used to, but I can still do a little bit of that and help set up. Once I demonstrated all those things to myself and I knew I could do them, then I had a certain inner confidence about my abilities. And I think people pick up on that. they pick up on if you're nervous or insecure or self-conscious, they immediately pick up on that. And that becomes kind of a death spiral in the relationship. But if you come in and you treat them as you would normally, and you show them that you're there for a specific purpose, and you don't need any special accommodations necessarily, unless I ask, I think people get comfortable with it. And that's all part of the, what I've been talking about, this idea of normalizing what is, abnormal, after all, right? This is not something you see every day, but people shouldn't be focused on it. They shouldn't latch onto that as the defining element of my life. And I want them to understand that I am a person who's doing a job, who's meeting them to conduct an interview, who happens to be a one-armed person, not the one-armed reporter in that hierarchy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so anyways, also another point I want to address is things like confidence and just confidence, just like experience, job experience, you accumulate over time. And so
Yes.
those muscles you've already been exercising for a very long time. One big example is, of course, when you enter CNN with no science experience whatsoever.
Right. Yeah.
And they gave you the job anyways because of
Yeah.
what you said and your persuasion. And so, but for some people with disabilities, especially if their disabilities came at a very young age, the social script, the other people's perception of them, their expectations of them, um, people are very impressionable, especially at a very young age. And so what we perceive, how others treat us and their expectations of us, is how much they can rise, I think.
Yeah, it's
And
just and people want to judge and define us all the time, right? And that goes for able-bodied or not, right? That's just the way human beings are. And so it's really up to us as individuals, whatever our body shape or our situation is, to define ourselves, period. At full stop. We are in charge of our own definitions, and we judge ourselves, right? We have our own moral compass, and we have our own idea of what is important and where our passions lie and what we want to pursue. And it's so important that we set our own expectations, our own goals, and meet them, and not pay attention to what others may think we can and cannot do. It's very difficult to do that, especially for young people if they're getting a contrary message. But I really think so I'm 61 years old. I'm a boomer. I think in my lifetime, the way people address and perceive disability has changed significantly. I mean, I think it was much more of a hidden thing. When I was young in school, we didn't have any, kids weren't mainstreamed at all, right? There was no one different in the classroom, really, very unusually. And now it's changed. It's taken a lot of time, and there's still all kinds of prejudiced notions on this and preconceived ideas about what we can and cannot do. But I don't think my kids, who are millennials, view disability in the same way that I did when I was young. I think it's just another thing. It's a feature. It's another unusual thing about a person for them. And it's not something that defines people or should be in any way a way to contain, to make someone, to lower your expectations for what that individual can do. I think we in the disabled community should always try to exceed whatever those unspoken expectations may be, wherever possible. And truly, I think that gets noticed over time. And I think maybe that's slowly changing.
Yeah. So I have one last question, and then Gene's gonna ask his questions finally.
You've been
Sorry about
patient,
that,
Gene.
Gene. So I know he's excited to ask about his science and aviation questions. One final question for you from me is something I alluded to earlier from the previous question is your confidence. What makes you so confident? So you were a history major, nothing to do with science, aviation, technology, all this very technical background subjects. And also you're a you have something in common with Steve Jobs and all the other famous people, the Microsoft one. I'm skipping Bill Gates,
Yeah.
who didn't completely finish college, right?
Yeah, I
So
have a semester to go.
yeah. So, how did you manage to be one of the top science and space reporters we know? I mean, I can't think of another reporter in the subject as of this moment. How did you do it? What factors led to your success? And especially answer the question in light of how others can also cultivate this confidence.
Yeah, so I think there's this idea of number one, finding what you love, and not everybody can do that. That's when I say that, I'm cognizant there are a lot of people who never find their real passion. It does happen, but I am lucky that I found a passion pretty early on for. I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed telling stories, I enjoyed photography. It all kind of just was my happy place. And so I just kept pursuing that. And so I knew when I kind of bluffed my way into the science job, science reporter's job at CNN, I knew what I loved. I knew I loved telling stories. I got to say, president of CNN, that you should hire me to be the science correspondent because I don't know science. I wasn't sure if that was entirely true, but actually it turned out to be so, because I knew in my heart of hearts that I was going to work as hard as I could, do the extra homework, rely on some mentors in and outside of CNN to figure out the science part. And I knew I could do it because I knew I could outwork uh, somebody who maybe had the science background, didn't have to do the basic 101 kind of stuff that I had to get to the understanding. So I think that confidence comes ultimately from knowing that I had a burning desire to tell stories, to move the needle on the debate, to help people understand a complex world. All of that just fascinated me. And I guess confidence comes from knowing you have that desire, but you also have some innate talent to pull it off. And the science part was probably on the edge. Maybe you could call that stretching my confidence level, but sometimes it's best to know what you don't know, or not know what you don't know, whatever the case may be. It was an unknown unknown, and maybe that was just as well.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And next, so Jean, you finally get your chance.
Hey, Gene.
Hey, hi. Um, I guess let me first start with just saying it's an honor to be on your show, Ming, and have the opportunity to meet your amazing guest, Miles. It's really something I've been looking forward to all day. So thank you.
Fantastic. Great.
And also, like, just listening to what you were both talking about, it's fair to say that you both don't take no for an answer. And I think that's a great thing. I found that out firsthand from Ming when she was traveling in Australia, and we were traveling to the Great Barrier Reef. And some things I was thinking, well, this is going to be tough. There might be alternatives to whatever situation we're facing right now. And the first thing that happened was Ming said, no, we're going to do it. This is the way we're going to do it. And that was just an incredible experience. So I like the attitude, and I think it's really important for the world to have people to take that on and push progress forward.
Yeah, I think Ming's the kind of person to travel with for sure.
Right? Oh, it was a ball. It was a ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are too kind. Jean, I'm going to take away your time.
Well, and yeah, just quickly, I guess I've got like an technology innovation background through family. So it was kind of nice to hear, like, Miles, your sort of your small daily wins, which accumulate into big wins, even if it's just, about your fashion and your shirt, or just simple things like eating, like just those little things which are just pushing those boundaries of innovation. I really enjoy hearing things like that, because I know the thrill I get from just figuring something small out and just having that as, like, that's my daily win, and it just accumulates. So
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it, and it's really important to communicate with others. I hear from a lot of amputees, of course, and there's a young man in Alabama who lost his arm about a year ago, and he's in college and he's studying architecture, and so I've kind of shared with him the story of the knife and the dice and all that stuff. And the other day, he calls me every now and then because he's trying to figure out how to tie a tie or something, and I help him on, we get on a FaceTime. And so I said, what do you do about your fingernails? How do you do it? And I told him how I use my toes to operate a nail clipper and stuff. Because normally I would go to get a manicure, but we're not doing that now. So, and he said, no, there's this little electric thing that kind of sands down your nails that you should use. And he was the one who told me. And so this idea that you're in this together and you're trying to share your little hacks, and
Yep.
job by job, it is the way to think of it. Otherwise it's so overwhelming, right? I mean, if you you wake up from surgery and you go, how the heck am I going to relive my life? If you frame the question that way, you're in deep trouble. It's more like, how the heck am I going to butter my bread this morning, and work through those one at a time.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess that community thing is something I relate to. Being in a tech startup where everything is hard, we're all trying to figure out new things, but having that community there behind you actually really propels you forward, and you don't have to work everything out yourself. So definitely, friends in the right places helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I guess just my background, I'll just share that quickly. I'm not sure if you can see it in here, but we've got the Space Shuttle Discovery, and that's something that I've hung up on my wall on the easel for a little while. So I'm not sure, Ming, maybe that's why you thought of me as a guest or someone on your show. But thank you. That this type of thing really resonated with me when I was younger, and it kind of pushed me to think, what do I want to achieve? What big things in my life do I want to pursue? So to hear that you covered some of these stories so closely, must have been such a thrill to be part of. I guess, like, right almost in the midst of these historic moments. Would have been quite something special.
Oh, it was such a thrill and a privilege. And, I've been very busy over the past couple of days getting ready for the SpaceX Demo 2, the crewed launch of SpaceX from about 90 minutes from where I am right now in Vero Beach, Florida, up the coast at the Kennedy Space Center. That launch is coming on the 27th. And I'm probably going to date your podcast, but it's been 9 years since the shuttle last flew, STS-135, July of 11, and which is really, it's a long period of time. People always ask me, do you miss going to the launches? And what I really missed is the people that I used to congregate with, 4 or 5 times a year, this little happy band of space watchers. And so it's going to be, because of COVID, it's going to be a little different thing. I'll probably be watching it here at home as opposed to being there because of all the concerns that everybody has. But I think to have that opportunity to, work with Walter Cronkite covering the John Glenn mission, and to have the responsibility and, the mission to be on the air for 16 straight hours when Columbia disintegrated in February of 2003. That to me was, those are career highlights. And that's what you kind of get in the business for, to, explain that, demystify it, help people through a national tragedy, and also a triumph. And that's what I've always liked about space in particular, but science as well, is that ultimately the moments that bind us together in space are joyous moments generally. Yes, we lose orbiters, but we also land on Mars and bring back amazing pictures, or we put footprints on the moon. There aren't many stories like that are those, universal stories that we all remember and know where we were, that aren't, either wars or assassinations. So that's part of why I enjoy what I do.
Yeah, terrific hearing that. I guess Ming wants me to ask a more technical question. So
Yeah.
Here's one that I came up with, which was, and maybe it's a silly question, I'm not sure, but here it goes. Do you think that weightlessness in space would make it easier or harder for, say, an astronaut who may be suffering from COVID-19?
Oh, very interesting. How would that affect their ability? That's a really interesting question. It's interesting because I was in Seattle for 6 weeks up until a few weeks ago doing a film for Frontline on the coronavirus pandemic. And I spent a fair amount of time in an ICU with numerous COVID-19 patients there. And they were all prone, which I didn't understand that was the protocol. Apparently by lying them on their stomach, it makes it easier for their lungs to oxygenate. So that's a really good question. Would that same effect, maybe what they're trying to accomplish by being prone, would be evident for anybody in microgravity? That's a really great question. I do know that you probably wouldn't want to be sick like that up in space on that aluminum tube they call the space station, right?
Yeah, I hope we don't have to find out the answer to that one.
Well, they were really worried about, making sure the 2 astronauts they're sending up there are, fully vetted through quarantine and tested, because that would be a very unfortunate thing if they brought the virus up there. So yeah, no one really knew what they might pick up on the moon, and as the missions wore on and they realized there was no real risk, that got loosened. But in this case, astronauts who go to space have always had some kind of quarantine. They don't want people to get sick in space, but they were thinking more about the common cold. Something like this would be obviously could be potentially very devastating.
Yeah, and very important for potentially a Mars mission as well. So the second one was from a friend, actually. He was asking, what do you think would be the most important development in space travel that would enable mass colonization of extraterrestrial space?
Yeah, warp drive, right? Well, okay, so getting to Mars is one thing, right? That's the round trip, mission for that is going to be, 500 days or so, including the time on the surface, if you just go out and back. So that's kind of a chip shot. And so we can probably imagine doing that with the technology we have right now. It's a long flight, but it's doable. I mean, one of the big questions they have to answer is the exposure to radiation along the way. Is that a real showstopper? And there are some other issues involved in that. But I think, basically we could sort our way through that and sort of figure out a way to get to Mars. When you start thinking about where next, it gets a little more complicated. Like if you want to go to, Proxima, right? The nearest star solar system that we are aware of. Yeah. That is a long haul, right? Light years of distance. So how could we imagine doing that? Well, you can imagine getting creating a spaceship that has that is kind of pushed by the solar wind, the ions that come off, these idea of kind of a sail in space. And that seems kind of like that would be, wouldn't really work, except that there's nothing to slow you down. So you're constantly accelerating as you go. But if you take that idea of, some kind of ion plasma thrust, which you could create with a nuclear power plant and, or something like that, some high energy source, which would constantly give you, not a huge amount of thrust, but constantly accelerating thrust. You could start imagining getting to beyond our solar system in a more practical, more multi-generational time frame potentially, or even the lifetime of one person. But it's going to take a while to get there. And we haven't even gotten to Mars yet. So we got to solve that one first and see how that goes. And think about how lonely it would be to be on that mission. You're not coming back and you're not going to get much help. But then again, think about what it was like for Christopher Columbus to set sail. It's not like they could call Houston when they had trouble and say we have a problem. So human beings have done this. Think about the Polynesians getting in those canoes and they started paddling, navigating with the stars, and somehow they found Hawaii, the most isolated island chain in the world. How did that happen? So humans figure these things out. These are not insignificant problems, but they are solvable if we focused on it and decided it was important.
We'll have to put both of you in charge of that mission and not say no to.
I'd love to go. I'd love to go. I would miss it here, though. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, being in isolation, even in the last couple of months, has made that bit of a reality check.
It has, hasn't it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I guess this comes back to my childhood and actually my parents' childhood. Neil Armstrong was such an important figure. Since then, I guess it's fair to say that the interest in space travel or just anything related has kind of fallen. Maybe it peaked and it's fallen down, but do we need another Neil Armstrong or a figure like that to come from the US or anywhere else in the world to take us to that next, frontier of space?
Yeah, I mean, Neil Armstrong was never comfortable with being Neil Armstrong, right? I mean, being the first man to set foot on the moon was something he had kind of misgivings about. He felt the attention was unwarranted because he was, after all, supported by, 500,000 people all in and a lot of, taxpayers' money to get to that point. He just happened to be the lucky one who was able to utter those words. But it was ultimately a huge enterprise, a huge team effort that was, expensive and led to that goal. So, I think that's another way of asking, do we need to set big goals in space, right? Is it that we're missing the Neil Armstrong or that we're missing audacious goals? I think it's more the latter. And the people who fit in, who execute those audacious goals will ultimately become the next Neil Armstrongs. But you can't sew it out of whole cloth. It has to be a real thing. So but we don't put astronauts on the pedestal that we did in that first generation, the Right Stuff generation. And I think overall that's probably pretty healthy because ultimately, as Neil Armstrong would remind us, there's a lot more to this than the people who ride on the pointy end of the rocket. And I say that as a person who is a former network anchor. I always felt like I was the astronaut on the pointy end of the rocket getting all the credit, while there's hundreds of people behind me in the newsroom making me look good. So I think what we need to celebrate are the goals and go after them and make a decision to do it and don't allow politics to get in our way. Find some big goals. Let's decide for real to go to Mars and just do this. And out of that will arise heroes, but I don't think we should ever overlook the thousands of people who make the heroes look good, because that's ultimately what I find most impressive about something as cool as going to space. It's how it all meshes together, how all the systems and the humans and the chemicals and all of that kind of in a coordinated, synchronized way leads to success. That's fascinating to me on its own right. And that's probably, the problem with TV is we like to focus on people. One person makes it simpler, but that's the cooler story if you can figure out how to tell it that way.
No, definitely. Looking forward to hearing what comes out of the next few adventures.
Yeah.
And with that, concludes the interview. Miles, thank you so much. We've learned so much. I've learned so much, even though I've done a ton of research on you. And I'm sure Jean's learned a lot. And,
well, you guys are great. You guys are great. It's really, it was fantastic. And I found it a very stimulating conversation. Thank you for doing your homework. That's important. when you're doing good interviews. You got to do your homework.
Did you like this video? If so, share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want even more resources, be sure to sign up for our email updates on our website, traipsingglobal.com. Keep learning new perspectives, keep being inclusive because it will make the world a better place for you and for everyone else. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on another episode of the Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour.